So what is the leverage that Donald Trump has over China to get them to go? So is he going to now substitute Venezuelan oil for Iranian oil? What is his leverage? I don't.
Right. So before, China was getting its oil from a variety of places. The reality is that China is dependent on oil exports to fuel its manufacturing economy. It imports about 75% of oil. And it was only getting about 1% of its oil from Venezuela. It's getting it's getting about 40% of its oil from the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so not just Iran, but the entire GCC area, Qatar as well. Now you've cut off a major supply network for the Chinese. Now the thing is, the Chinese are pragmatic. So what Trump will say to the Chinese is, I'm sorry about this war in the Middle East. I'm sorry you've lost your oil, but America can sell you oil. The Western Hemisphere, Canada, America, Mexico can sell you oil. How about that? And in this instance, it's almost a fait accompli where China is forced to say yes, because again, China is pragmatic. China is a nation of business people.
And so you think they'll go, okay, well, do whatever you want with Iran, and we'll buy your oil instead? You think that's what they'll do?
Well, again, the Chinese are pragmatic and strategic. So yes, they will agree to this deal, but they will also continue to support Iran with the hope that Iran wins this war and then is able to control the Middle East and therefore supply China with oil. Okay, so another way of saying this is that China could, in theory, get most of its oil supply from Russia, which is an ally. The problem with that is that you set yourself up for long-term risk. Russia could choose to up the price of its oil. So something could happen to Russia, which would disrupt oil supply. Pipelines can be blown up, right? So the Chinese are pragmatic. They want to have multiple trade partners. And they are not ideological. They're perfectly happy to trade with the Iranians, with the Americans, with the Chinese, whoever gives them the best price. And so for their national strategic interest, it's very important to have multiple trade partners and multiple sources of resources.
So do you think this was part of the calculation for Donald Trump to attack Iran? Was that to get the upper hand on China in a way, and that we could then start controlling their oil supply?
I think Donald Trump doesn't think geopolitically. I don't think he thinks strategically. He thinks in terms of television. There are advisors who believe this, but Donald Trump is just interested in good TV. And Venezuela made great TV that distracted people from the Epstein files. So his advisors were like, Iran will make even better TV when we go decapitate the Ayatollah, and when the Iranians cheer on the streets for regime change, when they shout your name in the streets of Tehran. That's what he was probably told, and he believed it.
And so he's getting a big surprise. It's the old story of we're going to be greeted as liberators, and then now a week into it, he realizes that's not going to happen, and so he's been saying that he wants that the war is basically over. And do you think that that's him trying to? Do you think he's realized that there is no winning this war, and that if he continues it will crash our economy, and so he's looking for an off ramp right now? Or is he not doing that, and is he going to put in ground troops?
So I think Trump has dissociative personality disorder in that he's living in his own world. In this world, it's very nice, it's very pretty, and what he's interested in is capturing the attention of the world, and that's why he's saying what he's saying. But at the end of the day, he is bounded by geopolitical reality, and because America is already committed to this war, they have to win it now for the idea of credibility. So go back to Vietnam, right? By 1966, the Pentagon experts have already concluded that the war was not winnable, that this war was lost, but they still continue to fight this war because of credibility, because an empire is a force that imposes its reality on other people, and it creates the aura of invincibility and inevitability. And if people recognize that these jungle gorillas could defeat the American empire, then all credibility would be lost. Soviet Union would laugh in the face of America, and therefore they continue this war, even though the war was not winnable. we will see a similar calculus in Iran, where even though the American general staff have come to recognition that this war is not winnable, they will continue to fight this war in order to maintain faith, credibility. Another phrase that is commonly used is sunk cost fallacy, where you go in the casino, you lose $1 million, and you can't leave anymore because you're determined to win back that $1 million. And America has invested too much in this war already, billions and billions of dollars in interceptors. And America right now has about 150 casualties. So it's too heavy of an investment. Also, if America were to strategically retreat, Iran would win. Why? Because Iran would have controlled the Strait of Hormuz, and therefore it could impose levies on the GCC. And now Iran would have the financing in order to become a superpower, which would challenge the Great Israel Project. And so America could not countenance that possibility.
So where do you see? I mean, it seems to me that this is going to be way worse for the United States than Iraq, Libya, and Syria combined, and Afghanistan. This is going to be way worse for the whole entire world, right? This looks like a legit world war, because it has worldwide implications for sure, and with the biggest superpowers being the United States, Russia, and China, and Japan. So where do you see this going? I mean, like, so do you think Donald Trump is going to try to stop it as fast as possible, or do you think he's going to listen to Israel and keep it going until we're all destroyed?
Yeah, so unfortunately, once a war starts, it achieves its own momentum. And even if Donald Trump personally wants to stop this war, and I think he does, the military won't let him do so. And the same thing happened in Vietnam. This war is going to continue to accelerate. And eventually, you will see the deployment of ground forces and even the introduction of a national draft. In fact, Donald Trump is already talking about the possibility of a draft. There's a plan to deploy National Guard throughout the United States by April. And you would do that because you anticipate that young people don't want to go to war. And I think they're right. So I think there is a plan in place to force a draft onto the American nation. What people don't recognize is that, as you point out, this is World War III, and this is global. And the world will never be the same again after this. The question is, how bad will it get? And I think that what's happening is a controlled demolition of the global order, which really benefit America. So I think that over the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be 3 major trends that we can anticipate. Okay, the first major trend is deindustrialization. Why? Because the entire global economy is based on access to cheap oil from the GCC, right? Not only is energy based on cheap oil, but also we have to remember that fertilizers, plastic products, the entire global economy is going to suffer controlled demolition. And there will be 3 major trends that will be happening in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, the first major trend is deindustrialization, because right now the modern economy is based entirely on access to cheap oil. Cheap oil is the basis not just for energy, but also for fertilizer, which grows food, also for plastic products, right? So once you lose access to cheap oil, you can no longer sustain a modern industrial economy. You can't have EV, you can't have AI, you can't have data centers, which means that you either send the urban people back to the rural villages to farm, or you starve as a nation. Okay, so deindustrialization will be a major trend in the near future. That's number one. Number two is remilitarization. And the reason why is that once this war starts, you have to be able to protect your trade routes. Okay, so one of the major nations that is suffering heavily from this war in the Middle East is Japan, because Japan depends on 75% of its oil supply from the Strait of Hormuz. And the Prime Minister Takayashi has told her cabinet that in 7-8 months, we're going to run out of oil, guys. Okay, so Japan needs to figure out how to use its military to control supply networks, how to create trade access. And so what you will see over the next 5 to 10 years is the massive remilitarization of nation states. Okay? And the third major trend is something called mercantilism. Mercantilism is basically just self-sufficient economies. Before, so we're now used to a global economy where you can buy avocados from Chile, where you can buy vodka from Russia any day, any time of the year. But that's not really sustainable. And so in the future, there'll be regional trade blocks that are controlled by a local hegemon. So basically, we are witnessing a shattering of the old global order and the emergence of a much more splintered multipolar system.
So you're saying that they're going to depopulate metropolitan areas and people will be going back in to live on farms? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. They have absolutely no choice in the matter because, again, urban centers are dependent on globalization and access to cheap energy and cheap food. Once global trade stops and once access to cheap energy goes away, then you are forced to grow your own food supply. Urban centers don't do that. Rural centers do that, right? So you need to shift the population from urban areas to rural areas if you want to sustain yourself as a nation.
So has it seems like, I mean, so many people warned against doing this. This is probably why, Joe Biden and Barack Obama didn't do this, was because they knew what the consequences were going to be. And so has the United States already lost this war and Donald Trump just doesn't know it, or does he know it?
Yeah, so I think this war is unwinnable. And the moment that you go into Iran and start this war, the moment that Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz and commits to total war, then this war is lost. So Donald Trump is interesting because if you go back to his first term, there are clear indications that he would eventually start this war. Okay, so remember in his first term, he was doing things that were extremely controversial, in which no American president ever did before, because they thought it would be not in the best interest of America. So things he did was he moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, who was the Iranian Middle East envoy, and who was working actually with Americans to contain ISIS, the threat of ISIS in Iraq. And then there were the Abraham Accords, which brought together Saudi Arabia and Israel. And so he was doing all these things that, from American foreign policy perspective, was actually going to destabilize the Middle East in the long term, because it would bring the conflict, Israel and Iran. Jared Kushner was basically Trump's de facto Middle East envoy. He was flying around the region and having private negotiations with the Saudis, with basically everyone. So there was a real danger that, given Trump's actions in the first term, he would eventually launch a war against Iran. The Israelis in the first term really thought that Trump was Cyrus the Great, which is the Messiah, right? The Persian Messiah that is celebrated in the Bible. And that might have gone into Trump's head, because if you go to Mar-a-Lago, there's actually a replica of the Ark of the Covenant in Mar-a-Lago. If you look at 2024, his biggest supporters were actually pro-Israel people. So the most famous, of course, is Miriam Adelson, who gave him $100 million. A few months ago, they had dinner at the White House, and Miriam Adelson said that she hopes that he runs for a third term, and if he does run for a third term, then she will commit $250 million to ensure his reelection. So it seemed as though from the very beginning, because Jared Kushner, who was very close again with Chabad Lubavitch, and with Netanyahu, in fact, Netanyahu stayed at Jared Kushner's child bedroom when he visited New Jersey. There's just clear signs that Israel has control over Trump. And Trump himself doesn't really think that long term, So it seems as though Trump is being manipulated into the situation, and he doesn't really appreciate the consequences because he doesn't think, ahead.